are glad that you joined us as we continue our discussions about municipal bond credit stresses, bankruptcies, and worse. Our subtopic here is the main lessons from Detroit and Puerto Rico. We have had several conversations with Jim Spiotto of Chapman Strategic Advisors about his insights into municipal bond credit stresses, and he has commented on lessons learned from Detroit and Puerto Rico. Jim, would you like to bring together or synthesize those lessons into the main lessons from Puerto Rico and Detroit that might apply to future stressed municipal credits in the rest of the U.S.?
Well, Paul, it would be my pleasure. First, let me say from the investor side, and also, quite candidly, from the government side, we should realize that if we see financial distress, don't panic. There are alternatives. There are solutions. The first one to keep in mind is early detection. There is no substitute for addressing a problem as soon as possible. The kick the can down the road has not worked in many different scenarios. We all recognize it now. It doesn't get better with the passage of time. Problems generally get far worse and become more difficult. So first, let's have early detection and let's address the problem directly. Secondly, let's not forget where we've come from. By that I mean municipal finance has helped build the infrastructure, the economy that we have, that we've all benefited from. The ability to borrow and have access to borrow and to borrow at a low cost came because people, our forefathers, made sure that, as Alexander Hamilton said, public debt was immortal. It had connected to it a sufficient tax source to pay it. And we don't take on an obligation unless we're going to fulfill it. There is no there to vary from that. We've seen in Detroit efforts to sort of take on unlimited tax GO pledges, which have turned out not to work. We've seen a question of the certificate of participation financing, which has really raised questions of, this time do you mean it? And all of those attempts to repudiate debt, going back to what we learned in the early 1840s, that if you try to repudiate it, your cost of borrowing go up, and you realize you need to undo your repudiation, become a proper citizen of the economic community, and pay your debts. You want to make sure that your structures are geared and worded and devised to make sure that debt gets paid. You want to make sure disclosure in your debt issuances are clear. So all the factors that we mentioned, can they file for a bankruptcy? What is the source of payment? Is it a statutory lien or a special revenue? Is it a priority under the state constitution or statutes? Is there a mandatory appropriation? Is there a set-aside? Are there effective revenues? Are there oversights? Are there ability to refund? Is there a mechanism or sources to pay us? All of those are understood by the investor going in, not a surprise at the end. I think that municipalities realize that we do need wake-up calls. This may very well be a wake-up call, and we can all pay special attention to these. If we do, we will be able to reinvest in our cities, which are really needed. And we will help reinvent our cities, stimulate our economies, grow our jobs, create additional revenues, and fulfill the future. That the past isn't the best is yet to come. And I think that is what municipal finance has been, and that's the future of municipal finance for all of us.
Well, Jim, thank you for your articulate comments. I took away from the last long paragraph 5 points that I think apply way beyond Detroit and Puerto Rico. I think they apply to all stressed credits. And I thank you for your 5 points. They were, to put this in pithy, short-term terse words. Don't panic. Early detection in terms of credit issues. Take an historical perspective. You talked about the sacredness of debt, and you talked about disclosure, and earlier in the series you talked about transparency, which had to do with disclosure. We appreciate your wisdom, Jim, and your historical perspective and your good advice.
Well, Paul, it's always a pleasure to be with you, and it was great to discuss these issues with you, and I appreciate your education of the municipal market in helping them hopefully better understand or at least discuss what should be our better practices going forward.
Well, Professor Spiotto, you've done a great job in helping educate, so thank you.
Thank you.